This is ContactTalkRadio.com, consciousness in action, and you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and Upsnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. I'm Devi Ward-Erickson, and I invite you to join me every week for another enriching and powerful conversation about the intersection of sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. Each episode of Sex is Medicine is dedicated to awakening your heart and mind to the true purpose and power of human sexuality. Please join me on this journey of self-discovery as we explore the art of using pleasure as medicine to awaken, heal, and empower every area of your life. Sex is Medicine broadcasts every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network. You can listen to the replay and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And now get ready for another episode of Sex is Medicine. Hey everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am your host, Miss Devi Ward-Erickson, and I am absolutely delighted to have you here with us this evening. We broadcast live the first Thursday of every month, bringing it to you juicy and yummy. And if you can't catch us live, you can certainly catch the podcast or the replay later on iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify. Please subscribe on all these venues, TuneIn.com, Stitchers, just everywhere they broadcast podcasts. You will find Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward-Erickson. So I encourage you to subscribe to all of those different venues and enjoy. We've been on the air for 6 years now. We have so many amazing episodes and so much incredible information with our phenomenal guests that we bring on. And so I encourage you to dive deep and dig in and learn more about how you can start experiencing sex as medicine. So this evening I have a wonderful guest. Her name is Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I believe I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you did.
Yay, awesome. And I am so excited to talk with you this evening because your topic of speciality is something that we get so many questions about. So the topic of fertility and menstrual cycles, and also what we're going to especially focus on this evening, which is the impact of hormonal birth control on our health as women, because millions and millions of women all over North America are on some form of hormonal birth control. And that's a wonderful thing, so that we can have choice over when and if and how many children we want to bring into the world. But there are also a number of side effects that may or may not be desirable, that often get overlooked. And so I am so grateful that you specialize in this area to share with us, give us a heads up around what kind of things we can expect, and maybe what some alternatives are. If the side effects of hormonal birth control are too yucky for us, what is our alternative? How do we control our output of children without using what's available to us in the market today? So without further ado, Miss Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, who is a fertility awareness educator, and she talks about vaginas a lot. Me too. What's up?
Shout out to vaginas.
Shout out to vaginas. Love them. And she's a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner who teaches women to chart their menstrual cycles for natural birth control. Love that. Conception and monitoring overall health. And that's a huge thing because we often don't think of our menstrual cycle as an indicator of our overall health and wellness. So that's a huge thing. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Lisa.
Well, thank you for having me. And I love that you said control our output of children. I've never heard it put that way. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, seriously.
But it is, obviously. But yes, I just thought it was funny.
Right on. So how did you get into this work, Lisa?
Well, I discovered fertility awareness at a really young age. So my experience was not really typical. I was about 18 or 19 years old, right out of high school. I had been on the pill for a couple of years because I had heavy, painful periods. And, like most teenagers, I didn't know what to do about it. So I went to my doctor wanting to be put on the pill because I heard that your periods are lighter and easier, quote unquote. And so because I wasn't on it for birth control, I would often not take it at the same time. And I had read the insert and I knew that if you don't take it at the right time, it may not be effective. And so when I actually needed birth control, when I became sexually active, I had this thought in my head that man, if I'm on this thing, I'm always going to be nervous if I miss a pill or something like that. And so I was like, so then I'll use condoms all the time. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to use condoms all the time, then why use the pill at all? And I also had this just general concern about fertility. I saw my mom go through fibroids and have to have a hysterectomy, and some of my aunts as well. And I knew I didn't want kids when I was 20, but I knew I wanted them someday. And one of the other things I had noticed when I was on the pill was that, every time I came off the pill for whatever reason for a couple months, my periods would come back just as heavy, just as painful. So even at that young age, I had this understanding that I wasn't actually fixing anything. The issues were still there. So when I needed birth control around that time, that was when I discovered fertility awareness. So at my university, there was all these cool speakers. We had a women's center on campus and they brought in all these, we had sex talks, all kinds of good stuff that was going on. And so somewhere in there, I discovered fertility awareness. And I gravitated to it right away as a way to prevent pregnancy. But very soon into my journey, I discovered that there was more to it. I had a subclinical thyroid issue that was identified because my charting instructor noticed that I had low temperatures and long cycles. And so I began teaching women in my early 20s, teaching the method. And now, almost 20 years later, I'm still doing it because it's a little bit different now. I'm in my 30s. A lot of women are having trouble conceiving. And even though I've been doing it for this long, the average woman still has no idea how her cycle works and how ovulation happens and when she's fertile. And even the myth that, you're not actually fertile every day, all that kind of stuff, the average woman has no idea.
So why do you think that is? I mean, that to me is alarming that as women, we are so disconnected from the natural cycle of our body. Same for me when I was 18, 19, I was clueless. I was absolutely clueless about charting my cycle. I mean, my every time I got my period, it was a big surprise to me. Oh, how is this happening? It's that time already? There was absolutely no awareness. And it was I was so disconnected from my own body and the function. It's a normal function of your body. So why do you think that so many, it's like epidemic, so most women, I would say, or at a certain point, are ignorant of the way our bodies work in this way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question. I think the simple answer is that we're not taught. So when I was in junior high, like many other people, I was taught that you could, quote unquote, get pregnant every single day of your cycle, that there were no safe days, but we weren't really taught about what makes pregnancy possible and the phases of the menstrual cycle, or even that ovulation is actually the most important event without which we don't have a true period. So all of that detail we weren't taught. But it goes deeper than that because even, so for instance, in my book, The Fifth Vital Sign, I go into a ton of detail about cervical mucus and the menstrual cycle and the different phases. And even in medical school, doctors are not taught that level of detail about the menstrual cycle. They're obviously taught about the menstrual cycle, but in terms of the cervical mucus patterns and all of, there's more than four, but in the book I talk about the four main types of cervical mucus and when we produce them and what they do and how they can screen out abnormal sperm, and it just goes on and on, but that level of detail isn't taught. So there's a deeper fundamental issue. I mean, if you look at modern medicine, the majority of it is based on the study of male animals and male bodies. So even in the actual research, often women's bodies are considered to be too complicated because we got all that hormone stuff going on. So they're not even testing the animals. It's coming out in medicine, even the way that we diagnose heart attacks. Women have different symptoms and different ways that we react. It's only now that they're teaching doctors okay, women react differently when they're having a heart attack, and this is how, these are the signs to look for. So it's a bigger issue. And I think just by touching on it, as women, we've basically been neglected by the medical system.
Thank you. And so I'm going to invite you to, what is the name of your book once again for our audience?
The fifth vital sign.
The fifth vital sign. And yay, thank you for showing that.
Yes.
Awesome.
And the cover, I asked my designer to make it look like a vulva, but like not actually like a vulva. So this was his artistic vulva.
That is absolutely perfect. And so we'll talk a little bit more about all the juicy detail that's in your book a little bit later in the show. So for now, I want to ask you, so menstrual cycles are, again, there's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. We're taught to just stick a cork in it and go on with the rest of our life, right? And try to ignore that dirty, nasty thing and pretend it doesn't exist and complain about it and it sucks and, you know, whatever, we hate it, right? And I feel blessed because when I was 19, I read a book called Red Moon. I think that was the name of the book. And it taught me to embrace and celebrate my menstrual cycle. And so for the last, 24 years, I love my moon. I love my period. I look forward to it. I'm like, yay, period, because it's a time to go in and self-connect and, it opens this portal into our consciousness. It's like an altered state of consciousness. So I love it. And another thing, though, is that understanding our menstrual cycle as an indicator of our overall health. Again, we're taught to ignore it, not to actually look at it and examine it and use it as a signpost for how healthy we are as an organism overall. So could you tell me more about that?
Yes. Well, I mean, a lot of it's everything you said. The stereotypes about the menstrual cycle that we're taught is that it's dirty, that it's inconvenient, that it's gross, that it's necessarily a negative experience. So a lot of women, even though it's really common for women to experience pain with their menstrual cycle, like I did, I always had pain with my periods when I was in my teenage years, but we're taught that that's normal and to be expected. So, even to this day, a lot of women have moderate to severe pain every time they have their period, but they just think it's normal. It's the curse. There's a lot of religious taboos. So there, it just goes on and on and on. But I suppose there's one of the main things to know about the menstrual cycle and to try to change some of those negative implications is that for women of reproductive age, the menstrual cycle is an indication of our overall health. So, I argue, and I'm not the only one or the first one to argue, that the menstrual cycle is actually a vital sign. So if you think about the most common vital signs that we're used to, it's like our heart rate, our body temperature, respiratory rate, blood pressure. So if you were to go to the doctor and they measure your vitals, we all know that there's a normal accepted range. And if it's too high or too low, not only does it give an indication in general that there's something wrong, but also specific. So if your blood pressure is too high, it's like, okay, these are the conditions that could be causing it. And so the doctor has a roadmap of what to look for. So when we think of the menstrual cycle, I always like to break it down because when I say menstrual cycle, we think period. Like that's the only thing that happens. So it's like you have a period and then fast forward and then you have another one. But if you take the menstrual cycle and break it down, you have your period and then, you have several days as you're approaching ovulation before you start to see cervical fluid. And then you have several days of cervical fluid prior to ovulation. So for women who aren't familiar, your cervical fluid either looks like creamy white hand lotion. It can look like clear, stretchy, raw egg whites. So you can form a thread between your fingers if you pick it up. And for some women, they might just notice that, if they're going to the bathroom and they're wiping themselves, it feels really slippery on a couple of days of the cycle, but they might not have a lot that they can actually pick up. So however it looks like for you, we typically make that cervical mucus 2 to 7 days before we ovulate. And then you ovulate in a healthy cycle, and then your period would come 12 to 14 days later. And so I think what's missing from the conversation is that ovulation is how we make our main ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. We have receptors for these hormones throughout our body, and also testosterone, I should mention as well. But we have hormones receptors for these hormones throughout our entire body. It's not just in our reproductive system. And the production of estrogen and progesterone cyclically, an average menstrual cycle is about 28 to 29 days, although it can fluctuate from about 24 to 35 days. And if you think about then an average healthy cycle, you would have predominantly be producing estrogen during the first half. And then the second half, you'd predominantly be producing progesterone. And so these hormones have very different roles. They support each other. Estrogen is proliferative. It causes things to grow. Progesterone causes the cells to mature. So this is a long way of saying that your period, your ovulation, your hormone production affects your breast health, your heart health, your bone health. And when you're not ovulating regularly and having a menstrual cycle, it can negatively affect these normal processes, increase your risk of developing certain cancers. And what I always say is, even if you never want kids in your life, you probably want bones that are healthy and that are strong. And just, for women who do lose their periods, often that's something that we see for women who are really athletic. Hypothalamic amenorrhea is a good example of that, where it's characterized by a combination of stress, over exercise, and under eating. So basically you have women who are exercising a lot, not necessarily eating enough to cover their deficit, and then they lose their periods, so they stop ovulating. And in cases like that, these women are more likely to develop osteoporosis, right? Like, that's crazy. We think osteoporosis like 80-year-old women, but we have 20-year-olds that have signs and symptoms of that because their menstrual cycle is disrupted. So at some point, we really have to recognize, like, the cycle is more than just about babies. For women of reproductive age, it's about overall health.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because you're a great point. When we say menstrual cycle, when I say menstrual cycle, I'm thinking of the period of time when I'm bleeding, right? I'm not really thinking of the rest of the month and these like hormone levels. And yeah. Wow. So I'm going to ask you the golden question that I get so often. And this is it safe to have sex on your period? And when we say safe, I'm thinking more from the health perspective. I think that's what people are wondering. Like, is it going to damage me, or is it going to damage my partner to have sex while I'm bleeding?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a great question. And I think that ultimately the reason that we would even have that question, have those thoughts around it to begin with, is because of the huge taboo around menstruation. So I mentioned briefly that there are certain religious practices, that talk about menstruation. And so in certain religious traditions, it is either completely not allowed for women to have sex or even touch their partner, even prepare food for their partner during their period and for several days later, so that we can confirm that there's no blood. Like, the thought of touching the blood would make you, unclean and dirty. So it's important to just point out that there are, even to this day, certain religious traditions where it's not allowed for a woman to be touched. So there's a very deep taboo against period sex. From a health perspective, however, there's no real evidence or anything that I've seen that would indicate that there's an actual danger to either the woman or the man, or, whatever gender combination is happening. So that is more of a taboo as opposed to like a legitimate reason why you shouldn't have sex during your period.
Yay. Amen. So I'm going to give you guys, for those of you who ask me, I'm going to give you my opinion from the tantric perspective. What I was understanding was in terms of the energy body. So when we're actually bleeding, our downward voiding winds are in a downward flow. And so there is some consideration of, if you're having penetrative intercourse, that may reverse the flow of the winds. So it's suggested to not for the first 1 to 3 days of your bleeding cycle. That being said, my opinion is that the body knows best. And if you are horny and you want to make love on your period, then you should do it.
Yeah.
We have Lisa telling us here that there's no health concerns. There's no contraindication from a physiological perspective. So I encourage all of us who enjoy making love while we're bleeding to go ahead and do it guilt-free and shame-free. All right, so all that stuff about periods. Now let's talk about birth control, so contraceptives. So that is, again, it's a big issue because it's impacting our hormonal balance. And you just explained for us so brilliantly and beautifully how that hormonal balance throughout the month can impact our overall health. So when we throw hormonal contraceptives into the mix, what happens?
Well, I mean, again, that's a big question, but I think what immediately comes to mind that we don't necessarily talk about enough is the impact of birth control on libido. So especially on this show where we're talking about sex and wanting it to be enjoyable and wonderful and magical, I think it's really important to know that the hormonal birth control, the pill, any type of hormonal birth control, has a negative impact on our hormone production. So as I mentioned, in a regular menstrual cycle, as we approach ovulation, we're making estrogen, we're making testosterone. After ovulation, we're making progesterone. And in order for the pill to work, one of the main things that it does is it shuts down ovulation. I mean, if there's no egg, there's no baby, right? So it has to do, that's one of the reasons why it works and one of the reasons why it's so effective. But what it means for your ovaries is that it's actually shutting down your normal ovarian function. So you go from producing your normal estrogen and progesterone and testosterone to producing very little. So there's a couple myths about the pill that I always like to smash whenever I have an opportunity. So one of the myths is that the pill makes you either regulates your cycle, so it doesn't. It shuts down your cycle, it suppresses your cycle, and replaces it with a fake hormonal cycle. So it prevents you from ovulating, so you're not getting a true period when you're on the pill. You get a withdrawal bleed. I know a lot of women are like, what do you mean I don't get a period when I'm on the pill? But it's not actually a period because you didn't ovulate. The other myth is that it makes your body think that you're pregnant. So no, when you're on the pill, if you were to look at the natural hormone production of a woman on the pill, it would more closely resemble a woman in menopause. Because when you're in menopause, your ovaries are inactive, you're not producing significant estrogen and progesterone or testosterone. So those levels would be lower. So then when you hear like, okay, 21-year-olds on the pill having like vaginal dryness and stuff like that, then all of a sudden it makes sense. So testosterone is key to this conversation. So when you're on the pill, it dramatically suppresses your normal testosterone levels by upwards of 60%. And so this is a hormonal response. So this is something that they can test with a blood draw. Often we hear, the pill and side effects, and it gives us the idea that only some women have side effects. So the testosterone lowering effect is across the board because it's a physiological response to shutting down ovarian hormone production. And when you're on the pill dramatically increases your production of a protein called sex hormone binding globulin. So if you've ever seen one of those like demonstrations with a magnet and the iron filings, and all the iron filings go to the magnet. So your free testosterone, like what the testosterone that's flowing through your bloodstream that would be available to your tissues and your cells, becomes bound by, because we have an increase in this SHBG. So then what happens is, even though as women, we make about 90% less testosterone than men, we need it. It's key to our libido. It keeps our vulva, our vagina juicy, flowing, all of that good stuff. What happens is, and the tissues are very sensitive to testosterone. So when we take all of this, like 60% of the testosterone like offline, then you're more likely to develop pain with sex. The libido goes down. There's some really disturbing studies that have shown that the tissue around the opening of the vagina, so the vaginal opening, the introitus, thins out. So the actual tissues thin, making you more likely to experience painful sex. And there's some really disturbing research that has shown that the pill shrinks the clitoris. There's no nice way to say it, just have to put it out there. So there was a study that I looked at where they actually measured the clitoral volume, and they measured the volume of the tissues in the vulva, and they found that all of the participants experienced a reduction in clitoral volume, meaning that the clit shrunk in everybody, and the average reduction in clitoral volume was 20%. So
ladies,
yeah.
This is important. So I just want to say, if a man's penis shrank because of anything he was taking,
by an average of 20%,
it would be taken off the market. It would be like, it would be thrown in jail. Oh my God, 20%.
Well, yeah, and whenever I talk about this, of course, women get freaked out. So that when you look at the pill, when you look at the research, there's no evidence to support the idea that this is permanent and that, if you go off the pill, these things don't rebound and change. But this is a very specific response that our tissues are very sensitive tissues in our vulva area, because they're so sensitive to testosterone. Like, this is basically what happens when we deprive these tissues of testosterone. So for women who've been on the pill, or who have girlfriends and have had conversations about the pill, there's a running joke that the pill works because you don't have sex anymore. And I think it's just really important as women for us to just talk about it and acknowledge it, because the reason that I'm so outspoken about it is because I think that we all know that some women then, maybe they're on the pill and they don't really have a libido. They just think that it's them. So they, especially if they were put on the pill when they were a teenager. When I was 14 or 15, like, I didn't know what my libido was. So if I had been put on the pill and then like just living my life, I wouldn't know that was potentially like a less of, like I might have just thought, oh, I'm not that sexual. I've heard women say this. I just thought I just wasn't that sexual. I just didn't want it. And so you have women who then take on that identity, all because no one just told them the side effects. So I want to be clear, like, I'm not saying no one should use the pill. For me, when I talk about the side effects, it's because I feel like we need to have that informed consent. Like, we need to know. And then if you go on it and you notice, like, whoa, my libido's really down, or my vagina's super dry, or man, sex is starting to feel a little bit more uncomfortable, or it's harder for me to achieve orgasm, or the actual feeling of the physical feeling is less intense than it was before. Because these are all, like, when they do these research, they go through all that stuff. Like, are the orgasms you're feeling less intense? Is the sensation less? All of those types of things. Then we can have that heads up. And if we ever experience those symptoms, we can say, you know what, let me just go off of it for a couple of months. I'm just going to give it, just let my hormones kind of restore. Let me see if my libido changes or comes back. Let me see if it's related to this pill thing.
Wow. I think I remember I vaguely remember reading a study or coming across my radar that they did studies on some kind of hormonal birth control for men, and the side effects were so severe that they
severe.
Yeah, they just took it off the market. So, I mean, these are significant side effects that are not commonly known. I've been hearing about the pill since I was 15. Never heard about shrinking clitoral tissue, suppressing the libido, all that stuff. And what you just shared about it really stands out for me, the fact that we are replacing, when we're on the hormonal contraceptive, we're replacing our normal hormonal cycle with a chemical hormone, so an artificial hormonal cycle that we're suppressing what's natural for us and then putting something on top of it that's artificial. Mm-hmm. That's phenomenal. And
sorry. And to take that a step further, what you said, so we're often told it's estrogen and progesterone. So we think that when we're taking these pills, it's our hormones. So you can't patent and sell like natural hormones because anyone can access natural hormones. So in order to put my name on it and patent it and sell it, I have to change the chemical structure just enough so that it's mine. So the chemicals in the pill, like the estrogens and the progestins, are not the same as what is found in our body. It's not even found in nature because it's made in a lab. So they take you can look at the chemical structure if you want, right? Depending on how far do you want to take this, but you can look at this chemical structure. They have to change the chemical structure. So it has similar effects, right, to our natural hormones, but they're not the same. So there's untold additional effects to that.
Yeah, I mean we don't think of this, and we're just following advice and putting the substance into our body. And I've also read research that says that hormonal birth control may contribute to higher instances of breast cancer.
Yeah, I mean, there's conflicting research about it, which is interesting for a number of different reasons. There's research to show that when women are having regular ovulatory cycles, so I mentioned, estrogen and progesterone have different roles. Estrogen causes things to grow. So we already know estrogen is associated with cancer. But progesterone then has this anti-proliferative effect. So that's why our menstrual cycles are like half estrogen, half progesterone, because progesterone is what causes the cell, so estrogen unregulated growth, progesterone organizing the growth, telling the cells what to do, maturing the cells. So women with regular ovulatory cycles then, what the research would indicate is that the progesterone has that protective effect because it prevents that kind of out of control growth that we see in cancer. And so, yes, the pill is associated with an increased risk of breast cancer, as well as liver cancer and cervical cancer. But what we see in the literature is that increased risk of those cancers is often minimized because the pill is associated with a reduced risk of ovarian cancer and endometrial cancer. So even if you look at the study, it'll say, okay, the pill is associated with increased risk of these cancers, but it's totally good because it reduces so it kind of, again, it's not
each other out.
Yeah. I did want to address that study that you mentioned, the study about the male contraceptive.
Oh yeah, please do.
Yeah. So I talked about that in the book because I found the study, I read the study, and it's just infuriating. So basically what happened is it's kind of like a male version of Depo. So it was an injectable an injectable contraceptive. And so, I mean, if you look at the side effects that the men experienced, it was a mirror image of the side effects that we experience as women. Lower libido, erectile dysfunction, feelings of depression and anxiety, and things like that were exactly the same as basically if you look at the side effects. And so, I mean, the difference was that because of these side effects, there was a special committee that intervened mid-study and actually like shut the study down. And basically it was like, it has been determined that the potential benefits of this drug don't outweigh the risks of it, and literally like the study was shut down. And so when I talk about this, obviously so for anyone who doesn't know, the first pill was put on the market in 1960. And some individuals, including myself, would argue that the pill is like the largest uncontrolled experiment that has ever been unleashed on women in the history of the world. And so when is someone going to step in and be like, hey, like, what about, so the pills associated with depression, anxiety, some women experience panic attacks, increased risk of yeast infections. Some women experience yeast infections because it alters the gut microbiome. It suppresses thyroid function. It is associated with nutrient deficiencies. It changes in partner attraction, which I think we'll probably want to talk about. But there's a lot of different, and then one of the other things I'll mention is it's associated with a temporary delay in the return of normal fertility. So there's a period of time when you come off the pill where your body has to just recover and the hormones have to normalize. And so there's a period of transition, in between which your fertility is a little bit depressed. And again, there's no evidence to show that that's permanent, but as women, we still need to know so that we can organize what we're going to do about all of this when we're ready to have kids. So all of that, and no one ever called off our study, but the minute that a man has like a teeny bit of depression, a little bit of erectile dysfunction, a little bit of anxiety, everyone's like, oh, stop everything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's crazy making. It's literally maddening. It's a crime. It's honestly, it's criminal. It's criminal. And so I have so much. So one thing that's coming up for me. So all of our listeners know, because not everybody's, some people may be on birth control and not recognize that it's hormonal birth control. So are you able off the top of your head to list off the different forms of hormonal birth control? We know the pill, but you mentioned a shot, or there's a ring, or there's a, IUD that's hormonal. So what are all the forms of hormonal birth control, or hormonal contraceptives, just in case one of our listeners is on one of them and doesn't recognize that it's impacting their hormones?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most common types of hormonal birth control are the combined hormonal contraceptives, and combined meaning that they're synthetic estrogens and progestins. And so you'd find that in the pill, the patch, the ring, the vaginal ring, the shot, or not the shot. So sorry. The combined like estrogen and progestin. So those would be kind of the most common. And so typically those are, your 28-day, you have the option of like a 28-day option where you have like your pill cycle. So you might have sugar pills, you might pull out the ring or take off the patch or whatever the case is. And then we also have like the 84-day, the 4 period a month or 4 period a year version. So we're switching that out. The shot and the progestin only pill, the implant, those are progestin only options. And so those again have the similar side effects, some similar, some different, but again, they work. There's 3 main ways that all hormonal birth control works. And I'll also put the IUD, the progestin only IUD, in that category. So the 3 main ways, we already talked about how it suppresses ovulation. So that's the first, but not all types of hormonal birth control fully suppress ovulation. So for instance, with the hormonal IUD and some of the progestin only versions, ovulation isn't always suppressed 100% of the time. So sometimes, an egg pops through, but one of the other modes of action is thinning of the endometrial lining. So the endometrial lining is too thin to be receptive to fertilized, embryo, or fertilized egg. And then also they block the cervix. So the cervix is blocked with a thick mucus plug, and that's the entrance. Like that's where the sperm have to get through to get to the uterus and the fallopian tube. So they can't make it. But I think it's important for a lot of women are told like, oh, go on the, progestin only IUD. You just get to keep ovulating and it's all good and your hormones are basically the same. But whenever you're taking a hormonal birth control, it's just important to know that it is hormone. the hormones don't stay in your uterus. I think that's one of my favorite myths, like, oh, just take the IUD and it just like, as if the hormone, like as if you don't have a circulatory system and like it's not going to go through your bloodstream, it's going to stay in your uterus. So that's a myth. So it's just important to know that. And so even if ovulation is still occurring, it doesn't mean that you're having like a normal cycle. And again, like the reason that I share this is just because I believe we have a right to know.
Yes.
Some women will ask me, they're like, well, how could you, even say a woman should use the pill? Like, we need to have all of the options available. We need to have, that's why there's a menu of all these different types of birth control where different women, even as a fertility awareness educator, I don't think that every woman should use fertility awareness because it's not right for every woman. And even for the women it's right for, it's not necessarily right at every stage of their reproductive life. So we need to have all the options, but we need to know what the risks and benefits are. We need to know how they work, and that allows us to make decisions. So some women are going to say, okay, this is too much for me. No, thank you. Some women are going to say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I know what the risks are. I'm going to use it. If I experience any side effects, at least I'll know to ask. And then also, like, if I know that it could impact, like has a temporary impact on my fertility, maybe I get off it, a year or so before I want to start having kids, that type of thing. And then other women are going to use it for just as long. And that's all I want. I just want everyone to like know all the information, and then we can make these proper decisions for us.
Absolutely. Informed consent. Yeah. That's what it is. Informed consent. These are the side effects or the repercussions, and then we're able to make a clear choice, as opposed to, oh yeah, my doctor just told me to do this thing and I have all this fallout in my life that I'm not even aware of. That's a side effect of this pill that I'm taking. Yeah. So go on.
Oh, I was just going to, because what came to mind is that, so the pills associate, for example, with an increased risk of depression. And there was a study that came out, and, teenagers who were on the pill overall had a higher rate of antidepressant use. So teenagers who were on the pill were more likely to be put on antidepressants. So this is the problem, because then, like, you're on the pill, you feel depressed, you go to the doctor, you get put on antidepressants, but no one's saying like, okay, wait a minute, we know that the pills associate with an increased risk of depression. Let's just, before we put you on antidepressants as a 16-year-old, maybe let's just take you off the pill for a couple months and just see if it improves. Like, this is a conversation that I feel like needs to happen. Same thing with low libido. You've got women in therapy trying to like work through their childhood issues, and like they could just be having low libido because of the pill. Like, we just have to open up the conversation. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely. It's huge. I mean, so many pieces of the puzzle are clicking into place for me with this conversation, like the vaginal pain issue that so many women struggle with. Yeah, low libido, huge issue. And like, I had no idea that being on the pill caused low libido or would cause your genital tissue to atrophy. Like, that's a huge side effect. Yeah, and so many women think that their vaginas are broken or they're inherently broken because of side effects from the pill. Again, that's why I say it's criminal. Absolutely.
Well, then they go to their doctor, and, what are they given? Maybe they're given some drugs. Maybe they're offered surgery for the pain, those types of things. And so one of the examples that I share in the book, and I had, interviewed this woman, I had her on my podcast, and then I shared her story in the book, but she experienced pain for years. She went to different doctors. Finally, she went to a surgeon who told her about vulvodynia, and she was like, oh my goodness, this is like, finally there's a name for what I've been experiencing. And the doctor recommended surgery. So they went in and they figured out where the pain was. They removed the tissue, still the pain. And in her case, it wasn't until she actually kind of found out just inadvertently that the pill could be related. It could be related to the dramatic reduction in testosterone that we talked about. The article recommended testosterone cream, and that was what finally got rid of the pain for her. Because again, this is an effect of the dramatic suppression of testosterone that is caused. So again, like, for women listening to this podcast right now or watching right now, this could be that piece of information that they didn't have because no one ever said, just like, oh, there could be a link and it could be related to testosterone and this could work for you, as opposed to like years of pain.
Exactly. I mean, the fix is and it's so easy to test. Like, if you're able to, we're going to talk about the fertility awareness techniques. If you're able to go off the pill and replace it, or hormonal birth control, whatever it is, and replace it with some of the techniques that you talk about, and just test it out and see what happens to our bodies. And it drives me crazy because low libido, and then they design a pill to address.
Yeah.
So we're taking another pill on top of a pill on top of a pill when the root cause of the issue is the first pill that we ever took.
Yeah. Well, for any woman who's struggled with low libido or painful sex or any of those types of experiences and is on the pill, I think the first thing that literally the first thing I would say is, well, before you jump to conclusions and pay your therapist and before you do any kind of like invasive stuff, like I would say that we know there's a link. So just try this first. And it's cheaper, but I get that it's complicated. I think when I'm a child of like the 80s and 90s, and I fondly remember like when I was a kid, they promoted condoms. I mean, it was also a different time, so there was more fear about HIV and AIDS. That was like a big thing in the 80s and 90s, so it was condoms all the time. But when I was growing up, condoms were taught as an effective way to prevent pregnancy, and these days it's very different. It feels like we're taught that, not only is the pill the only option, but we got to go to IUDs and injectables and implants, because as like even the thought of taking a pill every day is like too much. We can't trust women with anything. We got to just stick them with stuff and I'm not saying that like these methods are necessarily good or bad, but I'm just saying we've really shifted from condoms. So I think it's also just important to know, like, there are individuals out there who can't take birth control. Like there are women who are too sensitive to like estrogen and things and they can't, or women who've had negative experiences or just choose not to, who successfully prevent pregnancy. So condoms, when used correctly, up to 98% effective. Some women opt for the copper IUD because it's non-hormonal. The copper IUD doesn't necessarily work for every woman, but it is an option, and some women find it to be very helpful, very effective, obviously, and then in addition to that, it's like the dirty little secret. Some couples use withdrawal. I talk about it just because people use it, and I know that, again, we're told that it's basically not a method, but when used perfectly, up to 96% effective, which is interesting because we're not taught to say that again.
Yeah, 96% effective, and
up to,
and condoms are up to 98%. So that's huge. So I just want to say that, talking about condoms and stuff, the thing that prevents pregnancy is the lack of sperm. That is what prevents pregnancy. So my favorite form of birth control that I've been practicing for 10 years is semen retention. When men learn to control their ejaculation response and have non-ejaculatory orgasms and ejaculate only when they want to and choose to, and it's a collaborative event with their female partner. No, I'm not ovulating anymore because I practice fertility awareness. Yes, my cycle's in the next 3 days. Let's make love and you can ejaculate now because it's safe. I'm not even a pregnancy scare. So what I removed from the equation was semen.
Oh, you know what? I love this. So I love that you said that. So recently I released a podcast episode and I just kind of went on about this. There was a woman who released kind of like a controversial post. It went viral, and it was, I think she titled it "My Twitter Thread on Abortion." So if you want to Google that, but basically she went off on this long tangent about how men are responsible for all unplanned and unwanted pregnancies because of their irresponsible ejaculation. And you had all these women up in arms like, oh my goodness, how could you say that? It's not his fault, et cetera, et cetera. So exactly what you said. The way that I look at it is that we have an interesting culture that's really trying so hard not to interfere with men's pleasure. Everything we do is we're trying to not interfere with their pleasure. So we have to make our bodies resistant to sperm so that they can ejaculate inside of us so that their sexual experience is not interrupted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, because what does the pill do? It, again, stops ovulation, thins out the endometrial lining, and then prevents the sperm from being able to access our uterus, right, with that mucus plug. So essentially, we're making our bodies resistant to sperm and making it so that they can men can just ejaculate inside of us. So for me, I have a different perspective. I have never been on the pill for birth control. I have taken the pill, but I never used it for birth control. So in my entire life, I have never had, there's no man that I've ever been with that had the ability to just ejaculate inside my body whenever he wanted. It always had to be explicitly planned because I use fertility awareness. So the only time ejaculation could ever happen inside of my body was when I'm charting and I'm confirming ovulation. We know that, the egg is dead and gone, etc. Now we can do it. And I think it's just an incredible how do I even say it? But just such a state of entitlement that men can think that you can just use women's bodies this way and just ejaculate inside. And then when she gets pregnant, you're like, how did this happen? So I'm going to get off my high horse in just 1 second. But,
well, I'm with you. I feel you. I'm saying.
But basically, I know it's controversial, but I would propose just another thought for everyone to just chew on. What if men only ejaculated inside of women when they were explicitly trying to get them pregnant, and in all other circumstances took full responsibility for their ejaculations and either withdrew or used a condom every single time? What would the world look like?
Amen. I'm with you. Absolutely. That is like fundamental instruction in what we teach with Tantra. It's like mindful ejaculation. And here's the thing, it increases pleasure. So when a man separates orgasm from ejaculation and becomes multi-orgasmic, like my husband's non-ejaculatory orgasms are toe curling for him. And he has like 10 of them. I mean, like, it's phenomenal. They are more pleasurable than the most pleasurable ejaculatory orgasm he's ever had. So that's the thing. You actually increase pleasure by practicing semen retention as opposed to decrease pleasure. And I am absolutely with you that indiscriminate, unmindful ejaculation is the root cause of unwanted pregnancies, not women's sexuality. It really is. And yeah, and I hear you. And how bonding that is to be in relationship with someone where you're on the same page about your cycle and your sexuality and being mature and responsible. That's the thing. We're not taught how to be mature and responsible about our sexuality in this culture. So it's so mature and responsible to track your cycle as a couple and have agreements about when he's going to ejaculate inside of you or not. And then you're both, it's like, it's a team sport. You're doing it together, which is what a fucking mature relationship should be. I mean,
well, and prioritizing her pleasure. So for the record, you cannot, okay, so this is my opinion. I've talked about all the science and the testosterone, etc. But now let's just talk. Yeah. I don't believe that you can actually experience the true, full expression of your sexuality while on the pill. It's impossible because your testosterone is suppressed by over 60%. You can't experience the fullness of your orgasm, the fullness of those sexual expression as a woman. And so in terms of if we were really going for like, what could I do? Let me hack having the most blissful, amazing, connected, intense, wonderful sexual experience possible. It wouldn't be by taking a pill that suppresses your testosterone, shrinks your clit, and it wouldn't be that. So I feel like one of the missing pieces, even from educating our teenagers, both boys and girls, about sex, is pleasure. It's like the secret that no one wants to talk about. Like, we do it because it feels good. Can we just talk about that? And it's supposed to feel good. And as women, you're supposed to be able to have orgasms and to experience that pleasure and joy and all those types of things. So we have a culture. What do? As soon as a woman has one, errant ovulation that's a little bit outside of the 28-day box that we've decided is normal, we put her on the pill. And the pill has also been referred to as a type of chemical castration. Like, if we were to, take a man and like give him a drug that suppressed his testosterone by 60%, cut his libido off, like, we would know that could affect his, like, if you take the testosterone away from a man, I think we all know that it affects more than just his ability to have erections. Like, it affects his moods and his personality, all that kind of stuff. So but we don't make that connection. So in terms of creating those incredible sexual experiences for women, and even just acknowledging female sexuality and doing what we can to promote it. Again, it's not that no one should ever use a pill or all that, but we need to have a conversation about, I think it's a huge problem to have teenage girls we're not allowing them to experience the full expression of their sexuality. They're on the pill for like 5-10 years, and then eventually they go off of it when they want to have kids, and then they're like, oh my goodness, my libido's coming back, holy cow. Like, it's criminal to prevent them from having that full expression of their sexuality. And
as you're talking, I think it is criminal, and there's probably a reason for that. Suppressing female sexual desire, female sexual expression that's part of the patriarchy. I mean, that's by design.
Oh my God.
That's by design. Yeah.
Yep.
So before we run out of time, I really want to hear about this because this is huge. So how does hormonal contraceptives impact attraction to partners. You just mentioned that. You know, I'm 14, I'm on the pill my whole life. I'm attracted to a certain guy. I go off the pill to get pregnant, and all of a sudden I want to fuck like everybody else except my husband.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's really like, there's a whole field of environmental biology that studies this. So when I've heard of this, when I went to research it, I was like, oh, I'm probably going to find like one paper. No. There's like an entire like area of study. The truth is stranger than fiction. That's what they say. So your hormones impact how you smell to others. So our pheromones. So some of this is outside of our control. And our hormones also impact how we perceive the scent of others. So basically, when you're on the pill, it changes the way you smell to others, and it also changes how you perceive scent. And when they look at these studies, women who are on the pill tend to pick partners who are more genetically similar to them. So this concept is the major histocompatibility complex for anyone who's like a bit nerdy, on the nerdy side like I am. But basically, your scent that you give off is connected to your genes. So basically your genes determine the scent. So this is very biological, very science, but basically what happens is when you're not on the pill, you're more likely to be attracted to someone who has a scent and their genetics are more dissimilar to yours. So that would encourage that whole concept of like strong breeding and all that kind of stuff. But when you're on the pill, you're more likely to choose a partner whose genes are more similar to yours. And they've studied this like time and time again. And so that's a part of it. So then it's very possible that when you're on the pill, you would choose a different partner. And it doesn't happen to every single one, but the question is like, did you meet the partner when you were on it, or did you meet the partner before you were on it and then you started taking the pill because you were having sex now? Like which one? So because that would play a role, right? But so there are women, exactly what you said, who go off the pill and they notice that their partner has a smell and that they never noticed before, and they break it off. And that's why that kind of thing can happen. Yeah, and to give an example, there's another way that they study this, which is really interesting. So, the book I talked about, the stripper study. So there's literally a group of researchers who wanted to determine if women who are not on the pill, so women who are cycling naturally, have a competitive advantage over women who are on the pill. So, enter the stripper study. So they had women who were working, as strippers in a strip club, and some were on the pill, some were not, right? So we have the control group and, so the women who were cycling normally, not on the pill, they measured in tips. That's how they measured it. So the women who were not on the pill, their tips went up significantly during ovulation. And so they were kind of higher in the follicular phase, specifically higher in ovulation. And then in the, premenstrual, they were kind of consistent. And the women who were on the pill, it was just the consistent. There was no like change.
Spikes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So on average, the women who were cycling naturally earned $83 per shift more. So according to this stuff, but basically what I'm alluding to, and any woman who's been cycling naturally, like we're not robots, we're not slaves to our hormones, but at the end of the day, the majority of women I know who are on the pill, our arousal does kind of ebb and flow throughout our cycle, but many of us notice that around the time of ovulation, we are just like hornier than thou. Your partner smells just like he's got strawberries coming out of his ass or something. Like we're just like, oh my god. And there's a part that's like out of your control, where your partner might be all over you. Like you're kind of like living your life and your partner's like all over your, like at this time. So there is an actual reason for this. It is connected to our cycles. And when you're on the pill, that whole aspect of shifting like what you said, connecting with your partner based on the cycle, ebb and flow of your natural kind of, all of that is just, it's suppressed.
Yeah. Wow. And that's so huge. And yes, I absolutely missed out in my relationship. So I went on the pill when I was 19, and like I was on it for a year, and the side effects were so bad. And my friends were like, you have to stop taking that pill. You are such a bitch. I cannot stand being around you. So literally at the prodding of my friends, they're just like, we can't handle you anymore. Like, this is crazy. I went off the pill, never went back on it because the side effects were so bad, and used different forms of birth control, like condoms or other natural forms of birth control, and mostly fertility awareness. Like that was the huge one for me, is being able to track my cycles. So we are almost out of time. So I want to talk about your book. So your book, because I will ask, in your book, do you have ways for us as women to cultivate fertility awareness, to track our cycles, like alternative methods besides hormones for us?
Yes, absolutely. So, I talk about fertility awareness. I talk about the menstrual cycle in great detail, take you through all the different phases of the cycle so that you can have an understanding, and also so that you can gain an understanding of when you're fertile in your cycle and when you're not. So on the most basic level, for a woman who just wants to start, getting into this, everyone's going to the bathroom several times a day. So when you go to the bathroom next time, just pay attention when you're wiping. If you're not on hormones, there's going to be a certain time in your cycle where you notice that it feels slippery, where if you look at the toilet paper, you look at your underwear, you're going to notice that there's, cervical fluid at, certain times. Cervical fluid can keep sperm alive for up to 5 days. So as you approach ovulation on those days of cervical fluid, that is when pregnancy is possible, because you can have that, fluid on Monday, you can have sex on Monday, and then if you ovulate on Friday, you can still get pregnant because the sperm is still alive. But outside of that window, pregnancy is not possible, and there's a lot of specific reasons for that, which I go through. In the book, I talk about the pill a lot. I have 2 full chapters on it with over 250 research citations, because I didn't want it just to be Lisa says this. I wanted to be clear that there's years of scientific research and evidence to show us why women on the pill are more likely to be depressed and feel anxious, why the pill is associated with the libido. Because a lot of people hear that and they don't believe it, or they don't want to talk about, or they think that it's kind of this fringe concept. It's not. I was just overwhelmed by how much research there was, and it infuriated me. Because there's so much, like, why are we not talking about this, right? But in addition to that, I also talk about the specific, just some of the specific ways that you can avoid pregnancy without hormones. So, fertility awareness is one of them, and most women who use fertility awareness combine it with their use of barrier methods or other types of methods. And again, depending on where you are, I always think about the spectrum. So some women are like, okay, I want a baby yesterday, I'm trying so hard to get pregnant, having sex all the time, unprotected, of course. And other women are on the 0 spectrum, like, there's no babies for me. If I got pregnant today, or if I had, unprotected sex and the condom broke, I'd take plan B. So we are all somewhere on there. But this works. It's worked in your life, it's worked in mine. Depending on where you are on that spectrum, you can double up. You can use fertility awareness. You can use condoms as well. You can use condoms with your diaphragm or your cervical cap. You can use withdrawal with, your diaphragm or cervical cap, or you can, some of my clients use condoms and withdraw as well while with the condom on. So there's things that you can do to manage your fertility without hormones, so that you can enjoy the full expression of your sexuality when you're ready to do so.
Absolutely. Wow. That is phenomenal. So where can we get that book?
Well, it's available on Amazon in paperback, ebook. I recorded an audiobook as well, so it's in all 3 of those versions. And I'll hold it up again. Thank you so much for... Oh, okay. Thanks.
The 5th vital sign. I love that. Yay. 5th vital sign on Amazon. And then for people who want to work with you, who need some support, where can they find you?
Well, thank you for that. So my main website, fertilityfriday.com. I have the Fertility Friday podcast. So if you're interested in these topics and more ranties about birth control and all of that, in your favorite podcast player, just type in Fertility Friday. And just one other thing, as a gift to your audience, if you're really into this and you're wanting to learn how it works, I have a free 3-part video series. So fertilityfriday.com/FAM, FAM101, FAM11.
Okay, awesome. And we'll put that link below this this video and this post. We put this on our blog and make sure everyone can see it. So we'll put all those links in the blog so people can connect with you directly.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a fantastic conversation. You are awesome. You have the greatest sound bites ever.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is, like I was saying, so many puzzle pieces were falling into place because I deal so often in my work with vaginal pain and low libido. And the link to hormonal birth control was not anywhere on my radar. And one of the things that I was thinking that's really interesting is that one of the functions of some of the tantric methods that we recommend to address low libido and vaginal pain is in naturally increasing testosterone. So
imagine that.
Exactly. So that's one of the ways that the exercise, the function of the exercises that we recommend naturally increases testosterone levels in the bloodstream. And So libido returns and juiciness does too. So that's just, it's incredible. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. And I am so excited that everybody gets to access you. And and we will talk again for sure.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
You're so welcome. Thank you everyone this evening for watching and sharing. I hope this was as aha-rich a show for you as it was for me. Make sure that you listen to the replay if you weren't able to catch us live. And I would listen to this over and over again. Content rich with so much amazing information. Make sure you check out Lisa's book and check out her website, fertilityfriday.com. And of course, you can catch us in between shows at authentictantra.com, and you can catch us live the first Thursday of every month and the replay on iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, Stitcher, all those good places. Thank you so much for your support, and much love and many blessings to you. Have a beautiful month.
You've been listening to Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward, your #1 resource for holistic sex education. Listen to the replay of this and every show at medicinesex.com. That's medicinesex.com. And send your questions for Devi to answer live on the air. Connect with Devi directly at DeviWardTantra.com. That's DEVIWARD Tantra.com. And remember to follow Devi Ward Tantra on Facebook and Twitter.